I'm really happy that Corien Prins is with us, and she's going to talk about lessons for science advice in future crises.
As said, the virus is still with us, but we cannot wait in drawing lessons. I noted that in several European countries, among them your countries, that we start to evaluate, and still happens in the Netherlands. So also a point of interest and a point of discussion in light of the GRC competences, I'm very eager to discuss that, is how do you relate with colleagues, science advisors that on the one hand sit at the table at the advisory bodies and subsequently in the evening shows in the media in the evening perhaps discuss a different perspective. In Austria, we saw, we read from the report that at the very beginning, politicians very much hoped to get straightforward answers from science to rely on. But the longer the crisis endured, the more it became evident, and that's in all countries, that the experts gave their expertise under conditions of uncertainty. But politics and uncertainty has tension and is difficult. And exactly the same applies for the Netherlands. I've just listed 5 countries here by way of example, and you can, I'm not going to discuss it in detail, but you can look at the different reports, and I find there much inspiration to draw some general lines. I think that that on science advice, we have a few similar observations, tension as when it comes to what disciplines to take on board, tension on, we no longer have to deal only with containing the outbreak. No, we now have to deal with much wider consequences, much wider than a pure healthcare problem, a virus-related problem, divides in society. Which means, again, relating it back to science advice, at least in the Netherlands, that we have to think about role division. Also because we have multiple advisory bodies in our country. And a final issue for here, how much room do we leave for alternative experts and expertise? Where to draw the line in what we see as science and science based at universities. So in wrapping up this first part, at least in the Netherlands, we felt we had to broaden the perspective. That in getting into a different phase of the crisis, we also needed a different science-based advice, broader, but also room for additional and alternative expertise, as well as room for different types of thinking. Let me put it that way. And that brings me to my second part of my presentation. The Royal Academy of Sciences and the WRR published in last September a report, and you'll find it on our websites, titled Navigating and Anticipating in Uncertain Times. What we did is we drafted an advice that focuses on the long-term strategic perspective. Hence, it doesn't deal with today's problems, but it takes a broader perspective because it is a long-term and more strategic perspective, thus including multiple challenges that we will face in the upcoming years. That's one. 2, with it, we had the ambition to broaden the dominant policy perspective, at least in the Netherlands, the dominant policy perspective being how to deal with COVID itself, with the numbers of people in our hospital and intensive care, how to address the virus as such. What is the effect of our advice? At least what we know thus far is that it stimulated our Dutch cabinet policy to to work with the scenarios that we presented. And we presented 5 scenarios, and this was September when we published this. And well, with the new variant from southern part of Africa, I at least presume we are more or less in scenario 4. But what we did is we presented 5 scenarios, not so much as a ticking box, but as a way of thinking, as an instrument for deliberating, as an instrument of, you could say, storytelling on how to relate to the crisis and the type of scenario that we have to face during this crisis. And what we did in sketching and detailing and discussing the different scenarios is we included the broader implications of the pandemic. So not only the broader implications for healthcare, both the virus as well as operations and types of treatments that can no longer be performed right now, as well as societal cohesion, the effects on the economy, sustainability, digitalization, as well as governance and law. Fundamental rights were mentioned earlier in our conference. So the essence of our advice is to help policy making based on scientific advice from a multiple number of disciplines, from different insights, and not from one type of scenario, but from different scenarios. And based on that, I have 2 more slides to go. Our main recommendations are anticipate in using the instrument of scenario thinking, and not, as I said, in that possibly in May we are in scenario 2, or hopefully we are in scenario 2, but as a way of thinking in the type of measures that you possibly need to take and the possible effects it has on broader societal resilience. And in doing so, we very much capitalized on a variety of expertise and experts. We included multiple academics at the Royal Academy, member of the Royal Academy, as well as expertise in our networks. And as said, we linked the scenarios to long-term policy issues, hoping that not only that we can just deal with short-term issues, such as how to deal with the recovery, that is more than just the healthcare problems that had to wait, but also how to rebuild society in many different worlds. Because aside from the pandemic as such, I think that the crisis also shows us that we have to move on towards a different world, a different type of society. But what type of society then would fit the future? So lessons for science advice, my final sheet. There's an enormous need of information. And what we needed is that sometimes information and knowledge is not articulated as needed. By way of example, our policy, our different ministries never thought of scenario and scenario thinking as an instrument in dealing with the crisis. So it was not articulated as a manner of thinking. Another lesson is the need for broader science-based expertise and insight as also a counterweight to groupthink or even a correction of mistakes. And that's my final word, both the Royal Academy as well as the VAR really are convinced that we have to stick to our expertise and role, and that we have to prevent role confusion. And I think that is a key challenge that we have to face ourselves as science advisors. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Corien, for this quite actually interesting and sharp and thought-provoking intervention. I think there are many things to think about, but if there are 1 or 2 burning questions, we can take them.
I think Sabine has a question.
Exactly. Actually, I just have a clarification. You were totally correct in showing what happened to the task force. And then it was basically made clear to the people in the task force, it's either one or the other, right? If you go into the media, then you can just not be on the task force. But that happened much after, right? So that, you know, that was we never even had some kind of legal framework how this task force worked, right? Nobody knew. So it was just ad hoc put together. You know, in the beginning, certain experts were missing. After a while, it got much better. But what you pinpointed was that moment when everything was kind of chaotic. People, you know, contradicted each other, and the politicians then blamed the scientists for the, you know, lockdown and all that kind of thing, and said, well, scientists are not supposed to actually even advise politicians. But thank God that all kind of went back down to nothing. But it was a weird time for about a month or so. Just as a clarification.
Thank you.
Yes, or Corien, if you wish to reflect on that very shortly.
No, thank you, Amar. This is valuable additional information, and I learned, if I'm correct, that there was a very recent report of the Academy of Sciences in Switzerland. Is that correct, on an evaluation?
There was, yes, but there was one more of a historical thing, and also taking an international point of view, and that came out of a workshop. I can actually send that to you. I can send you the link to this one. However, I would want to say that even we as a Science Council, we're really looking at this much more. So this isn't only the beginning of different responses. So, and the lead actually now for really looking at the response, the first response is by the Swiss Chancellery. So that Chancellery, that report will probably come out in the spring. It's not yet ready. So the academies have published something, but it's not yet, if you will, the finite, you know, story of what happened. That will probably come out of the Chancellery. But I'll send you, I'll look for it and I put the link in the chat.
Yes, we would very much appreciate if you share that with the ESAF members.